Good afternoon, hello, my name is Daniel, this is the TriathlonDan YouTube channel, and today I'm at UK Bike Fit with Dan, because Dan has a whole wall of saddles behind me. In this video we're going to talk about what is the best road cycling saddle and how you can find it. That's easy, isn't it, Dan?
Simple.
So we've got a range behind us of time trial specific saddles, road bike specific saddles, different shapes, different cutouts, but I don't really know what I'm talking about. Dan, please take over and explain to me why on earth there are so many different types of saddle out there and how people can decide what's the best one for them.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty obvious that there's no perfect saddle for everybody. It just doesn't exist.
Video ruined immediately.
It's got to be an individual selection for that particular rider.
Okay.
So there's no good saying, oh yeah, you know, taking saddle suggestions off your mates, going, oh, my mate runs this and he says it's really comfy. So what? It doesn't matter. So the first thing that I would look at to categorize saddle shapes, I like to categorize them into either T shapes or V shapes. So if we take maybe that one and that one, a T-shaped saddle would be classed as classically like a long nose saddle with a wide back and then a long narrow nose. So there's your T shape. And then your V-shaped saddle is more of a gradual decline towards the nose of the saddle, so it's that V section here.
Is it shorter as well?
Yeah, normally they're shorter. So normally your shorter saddles are more of a V shape, although you can get quite wide short saddles, and that would be a T shape.
So T shapes and V shapes, got it.
So if you like to roll your pelvis forward as you ride, whether you're in like an aggressive position or you're maybe on a TT bike or something like that, in general, as a rule of thumb, you would probably suit a V-shaped saddle more than a T-shape. A T-shaped saddle is probably going to be more supportive when you want to sit your pelvis more upright.
More outright, endurance, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so you have those two areas of contact with the saddle there and there, whereas with the V-shape, your pelvis is much more on an angle here, and that V-shape matches your pelvic anatomy more.
Okay, got it. Because we see a lot of riders, particularly in the road bike time trial world, still using saddles like this, a full-on time trial saddle for their road bike.
Yeah, and we use them quite a lot actually with, use this saddle in particular quite a lot with road racers who do sit in that aggressive position. It is all about how your pelvis flexes and interacts with the saddle. Some people can still get into a very aggressive position, but their pelvis doesn't do the work. It's more their spine, and they flex a lot through their back. But if your pelvis does a lot of flexion, a TT saddle can suit on a road bike easily. Okay, so we've gone through shapes. What about cutouts? Some of these saddles have got big channels in the middle, some of them haven't. Is one more comfortable than the other? What's the deal with that? Yeah, it's, again, a bit of personal preference. There's more downsides to not having a cutout than having a cutout. The one detriment to having a cutout is that it creates edges. Right. So sometimes these edges to the saddle cushioning can cause pressure and problems, or chafing, or saddle sores. These saddles exist where they don't have a cutout, but the material and the padding in the center and on the nose of the saddle is extremely soft. So it eliminates those edges, but still gives you very minimal pressure in the center of the saddle. But generally most saddles will now come with a cutout. There's not that many that exist that don't. Okay.
Are there any saddles which are better for a common problem in the cycling world, as we know, is saddle sores? Somebody's getting general chafing down there. Is a certain type of saddle better, or does it stand true that it isn't? You just need to figure out which is the best one for you?
It's still individual. Saddle sores and chafing is normally down to a friction type problem though, rather than a pressure problem. So sometimes that can be the saddle shape, in that if the nose is too wide and your thighs are constantly rubbing it, then that can cause saddle sores. But your pressure problems are normally the ones that's more like numbness or bony pain, problems like that.
Okay. Talk to me about saddle width. How important is saddle width? Is it true that if you want a more comfortable ride, you go for a wider saddle because a narrow one's less comfy? Is that right or wrong?
No. So again, if we go back to, this saddle's a good example. These are the same saddle, but different versions, different widths. Yeah. So this is a 168mm saddle, and this is a 145mm saddle. if we go back to what we were saying about T-shapes and V-shapes, the width of the saddle is just meaning that this is more of a T-shape and that's more of a V-shape. So in terms of a loading pattern, when we look at pressure mapping on saddles, I'd expect this to suit a more of an upright position versus this, which would probably suit a more of a forward position with your pelvis. So I don't tend to think of width as like trying to match your sit bone width to the saddle or anything like that. It's more about how you interact with the saddle and what your loading pattern's like.
You've just touched on saddle pressure mapping. Is that the way to find out what saddle is right for you?
It's the only way to see what happens with your saddle as you ride the bike. So otherwise it's invisible, right? So the pressure mapping gives us some data that's otherwise invisible. So we can see where you load the saddle, how you load the saddle, how your pelvis moves on the saddle, which is arguably more important than just pressure. So that gives us data to then go and say, right, well, let's test this, let's test that, and then see what the effect is of these different saddle characteristics. So we can test a different width saddle, or one with a cutout, one with not a cutout, and see what the difference is instantly without you having to ride it for hours and hours and hours. Okay. So it really helps to narrow down your saddle choice very quickly.
Right. So gold standard is to come and see you ideally for a saddle pressure mapping session. If you can't do that, think about the intended discipline or the type of riding that you're doing with regard to T-shapes and V-shapes. Is there anything else people can do at home to be able to find the right saddle for them, or is it just a case of trial and error?
Yeah, if you're not doing any of that, it's a case of trial and error really. But I would say have a think about how your pelvis, or get someone to take a picture or a film of you riding the bike and just see how your pelvis places itself on the saddle. If you do roll forward and you are quite aggressive with your pelvis, maybe start thinking about a V-shaped saddle. And if you are more upright with your pelvis, think about a T-shaped saddle.
Yeah, and this sort of thing is so important. I did the Haute Route Alps a few years ago now, but I had quite bad saddle sores, and that was almost at the point where, like, can I do the next stage the next day? Because it can end you. You can be as fit as you want, but if you're not comfortable, there's a chance you're not able to ride your bike. So.
Yeah, the saddle comfort is the really easy way to tell whether your saddle isn't right for you or not. But again, going back to the pressure mapping, you can have a comfortable saddle that is of detriment to you in other ways, where you're not getting any pelvic stability, you're not getting any proper loading of your pelvis, but comfort-wise, you're sort of muddling through, you're okay, but there's other gains to be had from having a solid support at your saddle and at your pelvis.
Are there any specific saddles you'd recommend for like an all-round cyclist, or is it you can't recommend because of what you've said?
Yeah, I always like to stay away from saying, oh, if you're wondering about saddles, try this or try that, because really it's just it's an educated guess, but it's still a guess. It's a stab in the dark. I'd say that there are certain saddles or brands of saddles that do well at catering for the majority of cyclists, but again, trying to choose which one out of that range is still really difficult without testing them properly. Yeah,
that's where this sort of thing comes in. Often if you go to a bike shop, maybe they're aligned with one specific brand, and I know some fitters are as well, but having an option in a range is the best way, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And some of these we sell and some of these we don't. Like, and if one that we don't sell happens to work best, then great. You can test that and then go and buy it elsewhere. So
got it.
We're not brand specific.
Okay, thanks Dan.
No worries.